Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, we are going to take a little bit of a different course than we're commonly used to at Torah studies, where we ask a couple of questions on the Parsha, and we try to understand one particular section in the Parsha or a holiday. Today, we're really going to focus on a halacha, one general question, and that's a halachic question, and try to figure out a halacha and how it's connected to the Parsha this week. We'll show you in a moment. But I think it's very, very interesting, and maybe today they'll call it controversial. We're going to talk about intermarriage today. And we're going to discuss particularly, we'll get straight to it, we're going to discuss the marriage of Moshe Rabbeinu to his wife Tziporah, and how that happened. So let's begin in the Parsha this week. We have, toward the end of the Parsha this week, the story of the Jewish people sinning with the Moabite women. And they were, the Moabites came up with this brilliant idea, how to send their prettiest and best ladies to the Jewish camps to intermingle with the Jewish men and to seduce them, really, and to cause them to sin, and hoping that through causing the Jewish people to sin, this would endanger the Jewish people because we would lose our protection from Almighty God. We know that from already the beginning of the Parsha this week, that why did Balak hire Bilam? Because he asked, what is the strength of the Jewish people? How are they constantly conquering all these lands and are a march right up to our border? And they said their strength is not the physical strength. It's not the muscles. It's not the athleticism of the Jews. We don't know how to jump, and we're not that athletic, and we're not that built. Our strength is b'peh, with our mouth. We pray to Hashem, we daven, and we learn. So if so, he went to hire Balak, went to hire Bilam to curse the Jews to fight us with our own ammunition. So the end of the Parsha, when Bilam isn't successful, they come with a new plan to cause us to sin. And these women, at the height of their once they seduced the Jewish man, and the man was at the height of his passion, then the Moabite stipulated that before they go any further, this individual Jew would have to worship the Moabite god called the Baal Peor. And this way they got many Jews to sin, not only with illicit sexual relations, but also with idol worship, by serving this god of theirs, Baal Peor. God is very, very, very disappointed with the Jewish people, and he instructs Moshe Rabbeinu to execute every man that succumbed to his passion and worships the Baal Peor. And Moshe begins to execute the men, and most of them were from the tribe of Shimon. That's just the way it was. Now, at this point, something dramatic takes place. There's drama among the Jewish camp. What's the drama? So the drama is something like this. So you follow in text number 1, page 197. So a Jewish man, will start from this is going to be chapter 25, verse 6. A Jewish man came and brought a Midianite woman to his brethren before the eyes of Moshe and before the eyes of the entire congregation of the children of Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And then Pinchas, the son of Elazar, the son of Aaron, the Kohen, saw this. He rose from the congregation, took a spear in his hand. He went after the man into the chamber and drove his spear through both the Jewish man and the woman through her stomach, and the plague ceased from the children of Israel. So this was a terrible story, a black stain, if you will, on the Jewish people at that time. And what is the background to the story? Why did Pinchas jump up, take a spear in his hand? What did this person do? He came and brought a Midianite woman to his brethren. What's going on over here? So the explanation is filled in by the Gemara, the Talmud, and the Talmud says, this is in text 2, in the tractate Sanhedrin, page 82a. And the Talmud says that the tribe of Shimon had a leader. Every tribe had a prince. The prince of the tribe of Shimon was Zimri, the son of Salu. And they went to him and they said, they're executing all of our men. And you sit silently. You're our leader. Where's your protection for us? Where are you to stand up for your own tribesmen? So what did Zimri do? He took 24,000 people and went to Cosby, who was a Moabite princess. And he said to her, do my bidding, which this is a euphemism for sleep with me. And she replied to him and she said, I'm the daughter of a king and my father instructed me to only give myself up to the leader of the Jews. To understand this, what happened was the Moabite men, just to entice the Jewish people to sin, they were ready to give up the best of the best, the cream of the crop, the princess herself, the king's daughter. So Zimri turns to this Moabite princess and he says, I too am a tribal prince. Moreover, I'm greater than Moses because he's only the second son to he's the third child to his father. And I am the second child to my father. So he grabbed her by her hair and he brought her before Moshe and he said to him, son of Amram, and these are going to be the key words, is this woman permitted to me or is she forbidden to me? And if you're going to say that she's forbidden to me, who permitted you to marry the daughter of Yisrael? This is, they could imagine we were standing there. Such chutzpah. A tribal leader with a Moabite princess turns to Moshe Rabbeinu and says, is she permitted to me or not? And if you say no, who gave you the right to marry a Moabite woman? You can imagine all the jaws drop, eyes wide open to see what is going to be the reaction of Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe Rabbeinu remains silent. He doesn't do anything. Everyone remains silent. The Jewish camp is in shock. Until, as we just read before, Pinchas takes his spear and he chases down Zimri in this tent. In the act, he kills both Zimri and this Moabite princess together. That's the story in the Chumash, this week's Parsha and the Gemara. Now, the background story we know to Zimri is, we know Moshe Rabbeinu was born in Egypt, right? He killed the Egyptian when he grew up. He grew up in the palace. He went out to his brethren, the Torah says, and he saw one Egyptian policeman beating on a Jewish slave. And he looked this way and that way, and he killed the Egyptian who was beating up the Jew, and he buried him. And he, later on, they told on him, they ratted on him. So he had to run, he fled. And he fled to Midian. He fled to Midian. And I'm sorry, I was the whole time saying Moabite. I'm sorry, but this was a Midianite, not a Moabite. We're talking about the Midianites and the Midianite girls, and Moshe Rabbeinu married a Midianite. I apologize, I take that back. What?
Who are they today?
No. We don't know who anybody is today. Because everyone, Sancherev came and mixed up the whole world. All the populations are mixed. Everybody, there's no such thing anymore as one people can trace themselves back anymore to any people, original people of the Torah. So the story goes over there how he went to the well and he saw the girls. There was daughters of Yisro who came with the sheep, and she hands her back in the house, and Yisro gives Moshe his oldest daughter Tziporah to marry. So Moshe Rabbeinu marries a Midianite woman. That's a fact that the Torah tells us clearly. Zipporah was a Midianite, and Moshe Rabbeinu married her. Now Zimri is with a Midianite princess, standing before the entire Jewish people. He turns to Moses and says, can I have sexual relations with this Midianite woman or not? And if you say no, how do you have the right to do it? Just because you're the leader, you think you have your own set of rules? Right? You can imagine where this is going. So how do we address this? And before we get to the details, we'll ask a general question. Why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu answer? Why didn't he answer? So no one deals with why exactly. No, in other words, the Torah doesn't say why Moshe Rabbeinu did not answer him, clearly. It leaves that up for the commentaries. So Rashi in the Gemara, in the tractate in Sanhedrin, the Gemara fills us in the story, the details of this story. So Rashi says in text 4, there's actually a very simple explanation. There's a very simple answer. And because the answer is so simple, perhaps that's why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even answer him. What's the answer, the simple answer? When did Moses marry his wife Tziporah? Before the Torah was given. When did the story with Zimri take place? 40 years after the Torah is given. Before the Torah was given, there was never a prohibition from a Jew marrying a Midianite, because Torah wasn't yet given. There were no rules on who you could marry them. Text 4, Moses married Zipporah before the Torah was given. When the Torah was given, all Jews had the status of Noahites. They all entered the yoke of the commandments, and Zipporah along with them, as well as many converts from the mixed multitudes who joined them when they left Egypt. So there's two things over here. Number one is answers the question, why didn't Moshe Rabbeinu respond to him? Well, because he's talking to a people that knew the answer. Zimri himself knew why Moshe Rabbeinu was able to marry Tziporah and why he was not able to marry this Midianite princess. He wasn't asking a question. He was challenging Moshe Rabbeinu. Sometimes people ask a question because they want to know the answer. Sometimes people ask a question only because they want to get the question out. Today they call it a soundbite. People are just looking for a soundbite. It takes 5 seconds to get a soundbite. They say one sentence, and then they take that sentence and they spread it around the world. Right after it, someone refuted that sentence and said it was ridiculous, or you yourself maybe even said something to explain what we just know. But either for self-promotion, you take a soundbite and you throw it out there for the whole world to see how smart and brilliant or great you were, or they do it for the enemy, someone you don't like. You take a little soundbite from a whole an hour-long conversation. You take 10 seconds and say, "Oh, look, we got you, we caught you," and look at that. Look how terrible this person is. And most of, let's call it a spade, most of the information that we receive in life from the world around us is from a newspaper, or it's from an article someone wrote, or it's from watching television, from the news on television. And you're talking about so much news being condensed into 30 seconds or a minute or 300 words, 400 words. If someone speaks for an hour and a half and gives off the policies for an hour and a half and what they believe in, et cetera, and all you see on the news is 5-second soundbite, 10 seconds. If you read the paper, you'll get maybe 10 sentences maximum. You'll get 5 quotes from what the person actually said, and the rest is just opinions. What I think about what you said. And then we eat that information and we make decisions based on that, which is a terrible, terrible thing. So Zimri really was doing the same thing. He stood before a whole group of people and he threw out a statement, even though he knew that it was ridiculous what he said. And most of the people also knew Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even give it validation for a response. It didn't even deserve a response. It was such a silliness what he said. However, we have to address a greater question over here. Because perhaps this answers the question about why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't respond to him and why Moshe Rabbeinu was allowed to marry his wife. But at the same time, it opens up an even bigger question and problem. And that bigger problem is, if all of the Jewish people, including Tziporah, were considered Noahites, were considered non-Jews, did they need to convert to Judaism when they received the Torah? If you're not Jewish and you want to become Jewish, you have to convert. So if we're saying here that all the people in the world were non-Jews until Torah was given, so does that mean that these people had to convert into Judaism? Did the Jews have to convert into becoming Jews by the giving of the Torah at Sinai? Or was Torah just given to us and our Jewish status was given to us without any formal conversion? That's number one. Number two, some real questions over here. Number two, halacha is that if a couple, if a husband and wife who are not Jewish decide they want to join the faith, they want to join the Jewish people. So 2 non-Jews, 2 Catholics, 2 Protestants, 2 Muslims, to anyone, to atheists, they want to become Jewish. They're married, they're a beautiful couple together. They come to the rabbi and they mean it seriously. So if they both pass the test, so to speak, if they both make it and convert to Judaism, according to Jewish law, they have to get married now. They were never married, according to Jewish law. So you have to get married now. You were married, the secular law, it doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. The only marriage that counts for Judaism is a Jewish marriage. So you now have to get married. So this couple who were living together as husband and wife as non-Jews for 50 years, now they have to get remarried as Jews. We're married for the first time as Jews, I should say. So now let's apply this to the giving of the Torah. You had a lot of married people there. There were a lot of families. So he's saying after the Torah was given, everyone converted. The Jews had some type of a conversion that they had to go through. So does that mean that every couple had to now get married? Every Jewish couple had to now get married? Where do we see? We never heard of such a thing, that everyone got married again. It would have, seemingly, it should have been something we speak about. And then let's take it even a step further. We know the law is that a Kohen is forbidden to marry a convert. So all the Kohanim that were married at Sinai, if everyone was considered not Jewish, and then the Kohanim, right after the Torah was given, have to get remarried, well, we have a problem. Because you can't marry your wife. Because your wife is a convert. And if your wife is a convert, even if you want to marry her, you can't marry her. So what happened to all the Kohanim and their wives? And this question is on Moshe Rabbeinu. He was a Kohen. He was considered to be a Kohen. Aaron, Elazar, Itamar. What's going on over here? How do we make sense of all of this? What happened when God gave us the Torah to the Jewish people? What status did the Jewish people have before Torah was given to them? What status did we have post-Sinai? Did we have to do anything to change that status? So these are real questions. These are really, really difficult questions because Torah doesn't say anything clearly on this in the 5 books of Moses. The prophets don't talk about this. The scriptures don't talk about it. We have to look in the Gemara and see if there's any discussions there. And we have to look at the later commentaries, so after the post-Talmudic commentaries, and see perhaps in the Rishonim, in the earlier commentaries, and any other scholar who shares with us some wisdom on this subject. So in general, the general rule in Judaism, if you have such a question, you got to look first, before you make things up on your own, you first have to look at the bookshelf. See, what have the previous generations written on this subject? So we're going to do that over here. And let's analyze for a second Rashi's commentary, which is in text 4. Because Rashi, on the one hand, seems to say that when the Torah was given, all the Jews had the status of Noahites. On the one hand, he's calling everyone Noahites. But he also then makes a distinction, because he says, they all entered the yoke of the commandments, as well as many converts from the mixed multitude. What was the difference between the Jews? If everyone was Noahites, what would have been the difference of the mixed multitude and the regular Jewish person? This is a little bit difficult to see exactly what Rashi, seemingly he says we were all Noahites, but then he does seem to make a distinction between the Jewish people and the other Egyptians who came out with us in terms of their status. So Rashi is a little bit difficult for us to see a clear-cut conclusion on what Rashi's position is. So let's look at text number 5. And text number 5 is from Rameir ben Todras Halevi Abulafia, from the Yad Ramah. And he says like this: the Torah was given and the new ban on intermarriage was promulgated. The Torah only banned future intermarriages, but those who were married before the Torah was given were not forbidden to remain married. So in other words, he says, he's very clear that the Torah was given. That's when there was a new halacha, a new law called intermarriage. You're not allowed to intermarry. It starts from now and forward. Anyone who's already married, all previous marriages were already grandfathered in, so to speak. This concept of grandfathered in, so it's similar. It's not the exact same, it was a similar concept. The Torah didn't come along to break up marriages. The Torah just said, from now on, this is the way you're supposed to get married. These are the people you're supposed to marry. And therefore, they did not need to convert to Judaism to be married to a Jew. And therefore, he says like this: the Jewish people did not need to convert to Judaism. And it was an automatic process. When God came to Mount Sinai, he turned all the Jewish people into Jews automatically. They didn't need to go through any formal process of conversion. And similarly, just like they didn't need to go through a formal process of conversion, they didn't need to get remarried to their wives because they were already married, and that continued just as the day before. There was nothing new that took place. This is what his position is. Rabbi Yaakov Emden similarly says in text 6, before the Torah was given, the notion of conversion was not applicable because all people were equal, meaning everyone had the status of a Noahide. Thus, conversion didn't apply here. The only change was that the Torah was given. The Torah was given, everyone became now Jewish. Whoever was there became Jewish. For all future generations, we had new laws in place how to live moving forward. Then we have Nachmanides the Ramban, and the Ramban says in text 7, the sages in France say that everyone had to convert because it was before the Torah was given and they were not Jewish yet. I, however, do not agree. It is my opinion that from the time that Avram entered the covenant of circumcision, his children were Jewish and distinct from all other nations. So Ramban says it's actually a disagreement between the French scholars and him. He didn't agree with the French scholars. He was a Spaniard. So Nachmanides says that there's one opinion that says they did have to convert. There's one opinion that says they didn't have to convert. Nachmanides says, why didn't they have to convert? Because they were already Jewish. They didn't have to go through any process because they were already Jewish. So what do you do now? What are we supposed to do? How are we to conclude with all of these opinions? How are we to make sense of this? So the Gemara, let's go back to the Gemara. Now, here's something fascinating. Today, 2022, today is July 13th, 2022. Someone comes to you and says, my dear friend, I know you're Jewish. I know you go to Chabad and Windsor Terrace. I know you're involved. I know you're engaged. Do me a favor. I'm not Jewish. I love your people. I want to become a Jew. Can you find out for me or tell me how can I become a Jew? What do I need to do to become a Jew? So you open up the books and you'll see, obviously this person wants to take on all the mitzvahs. What does he have to do? 3 things he has to do. We discussed this a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months ago. If you're a man, you have to have a bris. Okay. In addition to the bris, you also have to have mikvah. Everyone has to go to the mikvah to become a Jew. You have to immerse in the mikvah. Fine. And the third thing was a korban. In the times of the Beis HaMikdash, they have to bring a korban. Where do we get this from? Where do we know this from? Who came up with this idea that to convert, you have to have a bris, you have to have a mikvah, and you have to have a korban? So let's look at the Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the codifier of the Mishnah, over there it says in Krisis Taf Tesam and Aleph 9a, Rabbi says the offering of a convert is derived from the verse, as you are, so shall the convert be. We understand this to mean that just as your ancestors entered the covenant through circumcision, immersion in a ritual bath, and the sprinkling of blood on the altar, so do converts today enter the covenant through circumcision, immersion, and sprinkling the blood, which requires an offering. This seems to be an unequivocal response to our question, because the Talmud can't be challenged. And the Talmud clarifies, Rebbe says clearly, that the Jewish people entered into the covenant of Judaism through a mass conversion. However, the conversion, when you look in the details, didn't happen at once. In other words, circumcision took place in Egypt already. Before you ate from the Paschal lamb, you had to be circumcised. So before the 10th plague already, there was circumcision. That happened 50 days before, almost 50 days before the immersion in the mikveh and the bringing of the sacrifice. the sprinkling of the blood on the altar. So it didn't have to happen in one exactly the same time, but there was a process. Everyone did have to circumcise. The only people that circumcised in Egypt before this were the tribe of Levi. Levi always circumcised the boys, but the other remaining 11 tribes did not. To eat the carbon Pesach, Hashem said, an uncircumcised male cannot have from it. So everyone was circumcised in Mitzrayim. Later on, we came out of Mitzrayim, came close to Har Sinai, we built the Mizbeach, and we did the rest of the process of conversion. As the Rambam says the same thing in text 8b, Israel entered the covenant with God with 3 acts: circumcision, immersion, and offering a sacrifice. And he goes on to list over there exactly the text would show each one. So we answer the first question. The first question is answered. Again, what was the first question that we asked? What was the status of the Jewish people? So it seems to be clearly from the Gemara that the status of the Jewish people was some level not Jewish, that needed to be a conversion process to enter into the covenant of being a Jew. And it's from that process, by the way, that we learn up until today what the process is to become a Jew. But we had other questions. We said, if they converted, what did we ask? If you're going to suggest that they did convert, then we had a very, very big question. Did they have to remarry? Did every Jewish man have to take his wife and do a new marriage with her? A new ceremony? Take her under a chuppah and give her another ring? Every Jewish family, did they have to do this? Based on what we said up until this point, it would seem that yes. Because if you convert, you have to remarry. Like today, if 2 non-Jews convert into Judaism, they have to marry according to Jewish law. We have no documentation. We have no shred of evidence that they ever did such a thing. Except for one, there is one singular opinion who says that this actually did take place. But one out of thousands of commentaries, out of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of books that discuss the Jewish people and halacha, these halachas don't mention a word about the Jewish people remarry. So the question is, why didn't they remarry if they were indeed converts? So again, we're going to have to look at some earlier texts to see this answer. And we're going to really learn two halachas over here that seem to be a little bit contradictory. Let's read text number 9. The verse says, in regards to tzaras, we know tzaras in the book of Leviticus discusses tzaras. Tzaras is the discoloration of skin. If someone has discoloration of skin, it turns white, the Kohen says it's tzaras, they become tameh, ritually impure, they have to be sent out of the camp, right? We know these laws from the book of Leviticus. So in the book of Leviticus, it says, Odom kiyiyah. In chapter 13, verse 2, it says, when a person will have. So the Talmud learned something fascinating. When was this said? When did the Jewish people learn this law? In the desert, right? Right? With me? Uh-huh. So let's ask the question like this. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu, imagine we're sitting here at the big class and Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching the big class to the Jewish people, the new halacha, the new law just received from God, the laws of tzaras. And as he's speaking, one guy looks at his arm and he says, oh, look at my hand. I have a discoloration on my hand. Is this tzaras? And they look at him and they say, yeah. They say, well, this thing has been here for the last 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, I'm walking around with tzaras. So is that tzaras considered tzaras or not? In other words, since this tzaras appeared before the law of tzaras was given, is it a real tzaras or no? So the Gemara says, the Torah says, when a man will have, will means in the future, which means any tzaras of the past is not a halachic tzaras. Only for the future we're talking. We're not talking about the past. So anyone at the class of Moses who had tzaras, they were 100% pure. No one had to go anywhere because their tzaras was permitted. It wasn't considered an unholy tzaras. So this proves, from here you have a proof, that things that were forbidden in the Torah only applied to the future, not to the past. So the past was grandfathered in as permitted. This would appear to support our contention that the marriage of Jews living at the time were treated the same way, right? If you were married from before the laws of marriage were given, so then you can remain married. Apply the logic, it's the same logic. Just as when it comes to tzaras, we say that if you had tzaras before tzaras law was given, you're permitted to walk around with it. Same thing with marriage. If you were married before I told you the law of marriage, so then you can stay married. So that's why we don't find anywhere that the Jews have to get remarried after conversion. However, this is not so simple. Why is it not so simple? Because I'll teach you something fascinating. You may know this, you may not know this. The laws of kosher, we know for an animal to be kosher, it has to have chew its cut and have split hooves, but that's just that the animal is kosher. What makes this now edible for a Jew? Well, they have to have shechita, ritual slaughter. Then there has to be a process of checking the animal to make sure it was healthy. And then it has to be soaked, salted, and rinsed. And then you can have it. Part of the animals you can't eat. Something very interesting you may have not known. But the laws of shechita, the laws of ritual slaughtering the animal, only started when the Jewish people entered into the land of Israel. 40 years in the desert, the Jews ate meat, but we did not need shechita. We did not need to ritually slaughter the animals before we ate the meat. Everything else, yes, you were not allowed to eat the blood, but you didn't have to shecht it. You can kill it another way, called nechira. So now the Talmud asks a very fascinating question. Imagine you were in the meat business in the desert. You were a purveyor of meat in the desert, a good Jewish butcher. And you had a refrigerator full of meat, a portable, somehow you have able to stack a nice amount of meat. And it's all meat that wasn't slaughtered. Kosher, but not slaughtered. Now the Jewish people enter into the land of Israel. Once you enter into the land of Israel, the law is, if you want to eat meat, you have to slaughter it. Otherwise, it's not kosher. So the Talmud asks now a question. From the moment the Jewish people entered into the land of Israel, were they permitted to eat that meat that was kosher in the desert? Or did that meat become not kosher? In other words, we understand that from today and on, from July 13th forward, we understand that all meat needs to be slaughtered. What about July 12th meat? That was kosher for the 12th. Does that kosher status stay with it to the 13th and the 14th, even though we're in Israel now? Or do we say, no, all laws of kosher change. So what was previously permitted now is not permitted anymore. And you know what the Gemara answers? The Gemara answers a very famous four-word Aramaic word. The Gemara says, the Gemara asks the question, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, were Jews permitted to eat meat that they brought into Israel that had not been slaughtered according to ritual law? This is Talmud Chulin 17a. And the Gemara answers the question with a four-letter word, teiku. You know what teiku means? Teiku means we don't know the answer. It's a good question, and the Talmudic scholars could not resolve it. The sages of the Talmud throughout the generations, hundreds of generations, could not resolve this question. And they remained with Tishbi, it's an acronym for Tishbi Yetaretz Kushis Vabayis. Elijah will come, when Mashiach comes, Elijah will come and give us the answer. We don't know. I can't tell you the answer. So what do you see from here? You see that the question is not easily answered. The Talmud struggled with an answer and ended up with a teiku, ended up with unresolved. But that's the question we're talking about over here. Apply the same thing to marriage. If we were married before the Torah was given, and now Torah is given today, telling me that my marriage has to be in a new form, there's a new way to get married, only certain people you're allowed to marry. Well, do I need to get remarried now or not? Seemingly from this part of the Talmud, it remains unresolved. So from one place in the Talmud, we seem to have a good answer that you don't need to get remarried. From another place in the Talmud, it seems to be that it's unresolved. So this leaves us with a question still. You can choose to follow that the first way of the Talmud and say it makes logic sense to follow there, or you can say that it's an unresolved question. It's a very, very good question, but the question needs to be addressed for the Jews now. What happened to the Jews? Did they convert? They didn't convert. And if they didn't convert, tell me why. And if they did convert, where do we see that they converted? It's unresolved, but seemingly we should have some more direction than this. So we're going to introduce a fascinating idea, two answers now. One from the Rogatchover Goin and one from the Rebbe to explain one part of it. And the Rogatchover is going to lay out a novel premise, a new idea that he's going to reveal, a dimension of Torah that he's going to reveal. And this is, he says like this: Avraham Avinu was chosen by God. Avram Avinu became the first Jew. From the moment that God made a covenant with Avraham, all of Avraham's descendants went into a category called descendants of Avram Avinu. They were no longer like everyone else. They were a new category of people. That was started with Avram. Not with Sinai, but with Avraham. Avram Avinu started this. Now, were they full-fledged Jews? Was Avram and his descendants full-fledged Jews as we are today? You can't say that. Why? Torah wasn't given yet. Before Har Sinai, what did it mean exactly to be a Jew? That was a new creation of Har Sinai. But just because you weren't a Jew doesn't mean that you were a regular Noahide. That's what he's explaining there. There was some in between, some quasi-status, where the Jewish people at that time, pre-Sinai, were in some type of in-between status. They weren't Noahides and they weren't Jews yet. When Torah was given, when God gave the Jewish people the Torah, so then retroactively we became full-fledged Jews. Let's read text 11:8. The truth is that the status of Avram's descendants was somewhat intermediate until the Torah was given. After the Torah was given, they became Jewish retroactively. The proof is that the Talmud in Yevamos 186b tells us that the mixed multitudes alone had the status of converts. But if all Jews converted at Sinai, did they not all have the status of converts? We must therefore deduce that the Jewish people became retroactively Jewish and did not have the status of converts. In other words, he says like this. Today, if I tell you a person converted, this person is a convert to Judaism. So right away, the question should be, converted from where? What do you convert out of? It means previously you were something else. That's what convert means. I was previously one thing, and I converted out of there now into becoming a Jew. So there was a difference, he's explaining, between the conversion of the Egyptian, we'll call them, the Egyptian who left Egypt together with the Jewish people, the tag-along Egyptians, and the Jewish people that were in Egypt. Because the tag-along Egyptian converted from Noahide to Jew. That's a full conversion. But the Jew didn't convert from Noahide to Jew. The Jew converted from quasi-Jew to Jew. That's not a full conversion. That's not a real conversion. The descendants of Avram were already somewhat chosen by Hashem. They were already somewhat different. They were differentiated by the covenant of Avram Avinu. So therefore, the Jewish people didn't need to get remarried, he explains, because they were never really non-Jews. If you convert from a non-Jew to a Jew, you have to get remarried. But if you convert from a semi-Jew to a full Jew, you don't need to get remarried. That's how he explains the status of the Jewish people before Torah was given. And that's how he explains why the Jewish people did not need to convert. That's why we have no historic mention of the Jewish people converting. And now let's get to Moses. Here's a fascinating teaching over here. Where did the status come from? Again, who was the status given to? This intermediate status. Who was it given to? Avram. Avram and his descendants, which meant it wasn't only to Yitzchak. It was given to all of Avram's children. Well, let's see, who was Avram's children? So if you open up a Chumash, we read that after Sarah passes away, Avram marries a woman named Keturah. He marries Keturah, and he has a number of children from Keturah, or together with Keturah. Avram doesn't only have 2 sons. It's a mistake that people make. Avram has many, except most of them were later on. So we don't read much about them. Avram sends them away with presents. But one of these boys that he had was named Midian. Midian went and founded a state of his own, had a family, and now all the descendants of Midian are really descendants of who? Of Avram. So it comes out that pre-Torah, before Sinai, there were many, many, many people in the world who had this intermediate status. They weren't full-fledged non-Jews. They weren't Noahites. Noahite is the term we used for everyone except for Avram and his descendants. So Tziporah was who? Tziporah was a Midianite. So here's where things changed. Since the Midianites and the Jews were really on equal footing before the Torah was given, so what changed now? What changed now is the following. Anyone who wanted to buy in to the Sinai experience and God giving the Torah and following all the commandments, they were all considered to be Jewish. Anyone who at Sinai rejected Torah, anyone who didn't want a part of that, anyone who didn't want a part of these people, so they all now became under the umbrella of Noahites. So this intermediate status broke up. You either went right with the Jews or you became left with the rest of the Noahites. There's no longer intermediate status once the Torah was given. What happened to Tziporah? Tziporah was a Midianite, the status of any other descendant of Abraham. She came along for the ride of the Jewish people. So Tziporah wasn't a regular Midianite woman who was not Jewish. 40 years later, if you take Tziporah, she's on equal footing and standing as any other Jew. Yes, she originated from Midian, but Midian originates from Avram. That was part of the intermediate status as a descendant of Avram, the covenant that Hashem made with him. So if you want to know the answer to the first question, how could Moses marry Tziporah? Well, now we know the answer. Moses was allowed to marry her because they were both equally Jewish. Are you going to say, but Moses was a Kohen and she was a convert and he was a convert? So we answered that question by saying, just before, a convert means you're converting from full-fledged Noahide to full-fledged Jew. That's who I can't marry if I'm a Kohen. But converting from intermediate status to Jew, a Kohen was permitted to marry. So this answers all of the questions that we asked. This is one way of understanding it. Now, some don't like this because they say, sometimes such brilliance people don't always agree with. Whatever, they have questions. There's questions in every explanation. But he carved out a whole new status called the intermediate status, which people maybe are unfamiliar. We're unfamiliar with that. So the Rebbe examined this question carefully, and the Rebbe concluded that there's another way we can understand this. There's another way we can understand this, and that's as follows. Marriage is actually, believe it or not, a Jewish concept to the world. It's actually a religious ceremony, marriage. Civil marriage is really, according to Torah, civil marriage, the concept of civil marriage is a little bit of foolish, because it's either a religious, it can only be a religious thing. Why can it only be a religious thing? Because it originated from Torah. So the religion ordains how one should get married. Before Torah was given, what did marriage mean? Marriage meant, as the Rambam says, man saw a woman and said, move in with me, let's start a family, and they were married. That's what it meant to be married. Came along the Torah, and the Torah has a whole new idea of marriage. That if you want to get married to a woman, you can't just move in with her and start a family. No. There has to be something called kiddushin, betrothal. First, you have to betroth the woman. After you betroth the woman, then you marry the woman, and it's a two-step process. Back in the day, this two-step process used to be separated by a long period of time. It could be up to a year. Today, we do it back to back. So when you go to a Jewish wedding today, the chuppah, under the chuppah, the husband puts the ring on the finger of his bride. The groom puts the ring. That's kiddushin, that's betrothal. He says, I hereby betroth you with this ring, like the laws of Moses and Israel. And then afterwards, from the chuppah, after the chuppah ceremony is over, they go into a private room, and that's called yichud. That's the nisuin part of it. That's when husband and wife are together. That's called nisuin. It's symbolic of it, because it's only a room somewhere. It's not a home, but it's symbolic of, I'm bringing you now into my domain. Now we're married. So we do it right after each other. But it used to not be that way. A man betrothed the woman, and she would go back to her family, and he would go back to his family, and it would take a year for preparation until they ended up actually moving in together and getting married. So now, where do we learn this concept of kiddushin, of betrothing a woman? The Torah gives us in the word, ki yikach ish. Yikach means literally takes. When a man will take. But likuchin, taking, doesn't mean you can't just take somebody. It means you have to betroth her. Now we find something interesting. This is background information for the following. In the book of Genesis, in the beginning of the book of Exodus, the Torah is introducing to us the birth of Moses. The chapter that begins the birth of Moses says, Vayelech ish midbeis Levi, and a man went from the household of Levi, Vayikach es bas Levi, and he took a daughter, the daughter of Levi. So a descendant of Levi took the daughter of Levi. What does it mean he took her? So I just explained to you what does it mean he took her. He took her means that he betrothed her. So the Gemara explains, what does it mean? We're talking about Moses' parents. Avram, his father, took Tziporah. He betrothed Tziporah in Egypt. Then they got married, and then they birthed the son, Moses. So the Talmud says, why does the Torah use the word for the first time that he took her? This word took. Well, what does it mean he took? So the Talmud says, you know why? Because Moses' father had a revelation from God. And the revelation from God was as follows. This is the way you should get married. This is the way a Jew gets married. What way did he learn? What way did God show him? What way did God reveal to him? What we call marriage today was for the first time ever introduced to the Jewish people. Avram was the first one to go through the motions of a Jewish marriage ceremony. With who? With his wife before they birthed Moshe Rabbeinu. It doesn't mean that they were full-fledged Jews, but it does mean that they went through the motions. Just as we go through we do certain things today. There's certain things you do, certain things you say. That's what Amram did in Egypt, even though it was before the Torah was given. So he was the first one to do this. Now let's go to text 12b. Inasmuch as Jews betrothed their wives even before the Torah was given, in the precise manner that they would after the Torah was given, right? So we did it the same way as we would do it later on. There was no requirement for them to remarry their wives after the Torah was given, because the previous marriages remain valid. Converted couples today have to go through a marriage ceremony process. Why? Because the first time they got married, they didn't do it the right way, according to Jewish law. But Amram did it the right way, and Amram taught the Jews how to do it the right way. So the Jews actually married as Jews before they got the Torah.
What if a Jew gets married by a conservative rabbi and they married another Jew? Does that count as a marriage ceremony?
Count for what?
Are they legally married according to Jewish law?
They probably need to have a get, or they may very well likely need to have a get today. But sometimes you say you have to have a get just for stringent purposes, even though maybe according to the letter of law you can get out of it without a get, but probably it's not the subject of today, but probably you need to have a get for that, yes. So now the Rebbe with this explanation explains something fascinating, and now he's going to bring a backup, a proof for this. Let's see, this halacha goes like this. The law is that a Kohen Gadol, the high priest, now we're going to the high priest. The high priest had additional restrictions on who he was allowed to marry. One of the restrictions on who a high priest was allowed to marry is what's called an almana, a widow. A high priest was not permitted to marry a widow. So here's what happened over here. With this background information, you should understand how the story goes.
Kohen can't marry a divorcee or a widow.
A Kohen, a regular Kohen could marry a widow. Only a Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow. So a regular Kohen betroths a woman who's a widow. Now, they're not yet married fully, only the betrothal. And as I said, it could take up to a year in between betrothal and marriage. So Kiddushin takes place. Nisuin doesn't, full-fledged marriage not. In between the betrothal and the marriage, the high priest dies. And they appointed this guy to become the high priest. So now, what do? He becomes the high priest, but the woman who he's about to marry is a widow. So is he allowed to marry her or not? What's the halacha? Is he permitted to marry, go through with this marriage, or does he have to break it up and give a get and break it up? So a very interesting halacha, text 12c in the Mishnah. The Mishnah states, if a priest betroths a widow and then is appointed to become the high priest, he may marry her. He's allowed to marry her. Why is he allowed to marry her? Because since the betrothal was performed in a permissible manner, the priest may complete the betrothal and marry the widow. That's the Mishnah. Now the Rebbe says that this is true in a case when only the betrothal was performed in a permissible manner. How much more so in a case where the marriage itself was performed in a permissible manner. Therefore, even after Moses became a priest, he was permitted to remain married to Tziporah with her status as a convert. Why? Again, why was he permitted to remain married to her? Because when he married her according to Jewish law, and it was permitted for him then. Now he got appointed to be a Kohen. That doesn't mean that he was not allowed to marry his converted wife. So the Rebbe finds precedent to really grandfather in a previous marriage that would have been forbidden to the Kohen. And this answers all of our questions. Let's go through the three questions that we asked to summarize, and then we'll call it a night. Number one, did the Jewish people convert en masse when the Torah was given? We asked. And the answer is that after scanning many opinions, it would seem that the answer is yes, they did go through some type of a conversion. And that's where, by the way, we learn the process of conversion till today. Number two, we asked, were they required to remarry after the conversion? So the answer we said is no. Why not? So we gave Two explanations. Either because their conversions rendered them Jewish retroactively rather than converts, because they didn't convert out of being a Noahide, there was this intermediate status, or because their marriages were valid according to Torah even before the Torah was given, as the Rebbe explained. Number three, we ask, were the Kohanim permitted to remain married to their wives if a Kohen is not permitted to be married to a convert? And that we answered that yes. And the reason is the same two reasons that we said before. Either because no Jew ever had the status of a convert. They were never really a full-fledged convert because they were always part of a tribe of Avram and part of a special covenant of Avram. Or because their earlier marriages were already grandfathered in as valid Jewish marriages. So therefore, yes, we all converted. No, we didn't need to get remarried. And no Kohanim did not need to break up from their wives after this conversion. What do we take away from this whole thing? Let's go back to the original point, and that is Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is challenged with this question, but Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't respond. Why didn't Moses say one of these answers? You know why Moshe Rabbeinu didn't say one of these answers? Perhaps we can say because not every question needs to be addressed. Not everybody who comes with a snide comment and remark needs to be validated. Sometimes you have to exercise the skill of ignoring people. I'm not going to even give you credence. I'm not going to give you my attention to give you a response. Why not? But why won't you give me a response? So the question is, you have to discern, where is this question coming from? Is it a question that's genuine because someone wants to know the truth? Is it because someone is seeking the truth and the answer? So then you give them the answer. If it's someone who's only trying to prove you wrong, if it's someone who's trying to debate you, to one-up you, to catch you, to show you how you don't know this, then ignore them. So there's a common mistake that people make. You meet a missionary on the street and they start talking you about Judaism, about Christianity, So naturally, there's a tendency for people, especially that were raised in a religious home, who have some information of Torah and Yiddishkeit, to challenge them, to fight back, and to get into a debate with them on the corner. But the truth is, it's a big mistake. There's no point. It's a waste of time. As we say in Yiddish, Losem game. Losem game. It's not worth, no one was inspired, no one converted to Judaism. Shouldn't say no one. Very few, if any, people converted to Judaism because a rabbi won a debate. That's not usually what inspires people. That's not usually what motivates people. That's not usually what's turning people on to Judaism. Because most of the debaters are not looking for the truth. The debaters are just looking to catch you on a mistake. The debaters are just trying to prove you wrong. So therefore, we learn from Moshe Rabbeinu. Zimri comes along and gave his big statement. Can I go with this Midianite? And if no, how could you have gone with this Midianite? You don't really want an answer. You probably know the answer. You're just trying to cause a commotion. You're trying to say something to defend your people. If that's the case, Moshe Rabbeinu says to himself, better that I don't answer. Better I don't engage, because not every person needs to be addressed if they're coming from this negative place. If they're coming from a place of toxicity, if they're coming from a place of negativity, they have to cool down. They have to calm down. They have to relax. They have to be interested. And then we can have the discussion. Then we can open up the books. Then we can study together. We'll explore. And together we'll discover the truth. Yeshkoyach, everybody. Who has any questions on tonight?
Thank you.